Welcome to week 6 of our winter break creative challenge. This week, it's all about photography. I'm so excited to get into it with you today. So, we are going to create a photo-focused winter scene. We're going to begin our journey in Photoshop Camera, and if you haven't played with Photoshop Camera, you are in for a treat. I'm going to try not to get lost in there. Then we'll experiment with photos in Spark, dig a little deeper into the things we can do inside of Spark and create a post. Finally, in Photoshop, we're going to look at a few different techniques. Don't worry if you're new to Photoshop, this technique has so much bang for your buck. Easy for beginners. We're going to create a snow globe. That's going to involve using some layers, some masks, and some blending modes. Now I'm going to give you some photos that you can use to get started with that snow globe, and then you can use your own or go to Unsplash. So let's get started. All right, we are beginning our photo-focused week inside of Photoshop Camera. So all I've done is open a photo from my camera roll, and you can actually shoot photos from Photoshop Camera or you can load them from your camera roll. I went ahead and loaded this one, and as soon as you bring in a photo from your camera roll, it does a little bit of correction already. So it's done that correction, and I've also cropped it. And so now I'm ready to start experimenting with some lenses. Just note that you can crop and make those corrections along that top right corner. I'm going to click lenses, and you can see that now my lenses have loaded along the bottom. If you scroll through, you can see all the lenses, and if you want to add more, you can click the Add More button and go to your lenses. Now for today, I recommend the Season Greetings. That's the one we're going to be experimenting with today. So I already have that one loaded, so I'll click on it. And you can see how many different lenses that you have just by scrolling through. So I'm just dragging through, and you can see I have 3 different lenses that I can apply to this photo. And so I'm kind of liking this one, and I can tap to turn that video on or off. And if I'm ready to edit with this lens, all I need to do is tap that lens again, and I can experiment with the intensity of the filter. And again, this is just all tapping. The intensity of the overlay and the vignette that's applied. So when you're done, you can just click done. We can see what that looks like playing out. And then when I'm ready to save, I just go ahead and hit that download button and save it to my camera roll. Now notice I can go ahead if I wanted to crop different parts of this, I can do that. I'm going to leave it the original that we had and go ahead and save that to my camera roll. All right, for part 2 of our photo-focused winter break creative challenge, we are inside of Spark. And we're just going to experiment with some of the things you can do with photography and editing photos inside of Spark. So as always, you can begin with whatever photos that you would like. If you used Photoshop Camera and you want to experiment with that, you can certainly experiment with that. I'm going to go ahead and find a winter photo and bring that in. And again, these are from Unsplash and Pixabay. And so I'm just going to get this scaled up and positioned inside that frame. So now with this photo, I have these options along the right-hand side to edit this photo. So I can crop this in whatever way I want. I can flip this. And I can also work with some filters. So you can see some of the interesting effects you can get with just these filters. So with that colorize, I can click through and find different colors. And same with that multiply. So don't forget to kind of experiment with what kind of looks that you like once you select your filter. So I kind of like that matte look. I think that goes with what I've envisioned. Notice that along this whole side, there are all kinds of different things I can add. And you can go back to our week 2 video if you'd like to explore those more. Next, I'll go into enhancements. So if I want to do any correcting with this photo, I can do any correcting with it. There's also a blur option if I want to blur any content, and we might experiment with that later. And I'm pretty happy with that. I don't think we need to do any more on the enhancements, but I want to show us how we can utilize some of these design assets. So if you remember from our Photoshop camera, we had some really interesting things that kind of came through as far as edging around the photo and vignetting. So let's see how we can get those kind of looks. So I'm going to go into our seasonal looks here. And you can see there's all kinds of snowflakes and other effects that we can look at. So we can just explore any of these. Some of these might be interesting with lights, or adding some of those interesting ornament kind of things might be nice. Let's add one of these snowflakes. So notice when I bring in that snowflake, same thing, I can bring in different filters. So let's experiment with colorizing this. I kind of like that green for some nice contrast. So I can bring that in, I can scale it down, move it around, just like with anything I would want to do with that. Let's see what other kinds of snowflakes we have. So all kinds of interesting things we can explore and add. These might be interesting. Kind of like that. Yeah, let's switch it out. What's this? Well, these are interesting. So we can kind of have kind of a light effect on there. Let's see what we can do with. I kind of like that as well. So you can add these different design assets and really just kind of get lost exploring all of these and finding different iconography and effects and things that you might want to bring in. And so I'm kind of liking our shape that we have here, and just like when we were working in Spark Post before, I can incorporate that in there. And then I can go ahead and add some text. So in this case, I'm going to bring in one of these pre-made texts just to kind of make life a little easier for myself. So I'll bring that in, and notice it's bringing in that iconography, and I can scale that, and I can tap in here and change the text and move that around however I want. So those are just some fun things you can do to experiment with stock photos or your photos inside of Spark Post. All right, so we're starting with our final results. So I kind of wanted to show you where we're headed and then back out and kind of orientate you to Photoshop and get us started on this project. So we are creating a snow globe. So here's some pieces that we're going to be doing. With our main photo, which is the photo inside the snow globe, we're going to learn how to select parts of a photo, kind of go through some of the selection tools and select and masking that you can use. Then we're going to start combining photos. And the photos we're going to combine are this black object, which kind of gives us our shape, and we combine that with the highlights that gives us that full crystal ball snow globe look, adding some masking to those objects, bringing in our background photo, and finally creating a shadow to just give our object a little presence. So let's back out and start you in the home page of Photoshop. So from our home screen, you always get a what's new, and I always encourage you to explore that to kind of keep up with changes. You can also do tutorials right inside of Photoshop. I went ahead and X that out, and here's the home page, so you can see the files that I've opened recently. There's that Learning tab where I can get started, and we're going to be exploring selection, so there's a great video for that here as well. I can then decide to create a new document, and much like when we were in Illustrator, it's really a matter of where are we headed. So notice as I change from photo, our web, where we have pixel size, and our resolutions went from 300 to 72. And I can also set up any new size that I want. For our project, we're going to open some source files and get started. So I've provided you with some images to get started. So that's going to be our snow, our black ball, our crystal ball. So our first step in getting our images ready is to kind of decide how much of our background we want and to remove what we don't want. So there's several selection tools that I can use. For example, I can do an object selection, and that's going to pretty much just select my tree. I can also just come in with my lasso tool and do a generic selection. And I can use some of the quick select tools to add to that, so I can combine any of these tools that I want. So in this case, I'm just going to do a generic selection with my lasso tool, and then I'm going to refine it using my select and mask, because I want some good parts of this foreground. I'm just going to shift and add to that here. But I don't want this behind the tree. So I'm going to go into my select and mask. And the first thing I can do is decide how I want to view this. I tend to like overlay, but you might like viewing with the marching ants. And so what I'm wanting is to deselect some of this part. So a couple of tools here. I can add or subtract to a selection using just my brush tool. So this can get us pretty close, but you can see around the tree, it's not doing a great job. And so this is where I want to employ this refine edge tool. And this is going to allow me to come in, and let's zoom in so we can really see this. And you can see how it's bringing back some of the details here. So we're just getting the tree and not any of that background. If you have not used this refine edge tool, whew, life-changing experience here. So I think that's good for what we're doing. And of course, if I were doing something like a cutout background and I needed to be a little more precise, make sure I don't have any colors, I would go through here and just experiment with these selections. For our purposes, this is good enough. So we're going to output this to a new layer and hit OK. So now I have that new layer. My background is still there, so I can come back and select that if I want. Now we need to do some other manipulations with this photo. So if you think about things when you look in a snow globe, there's a bit of a distortion, a curvature to it. So we're going to add that with a filter. So I'm going to go to Filter and Lens Correction, and I'm going to do a custom distortion. So instead of removing the distortion, I'm actually adding it in here for effect. You are welcome to play with any of these points. I'm fine with that, so I'm going to hit OK. And now I want to crop this image. So I'm going to grab my crop tool. And what I'm looking at is I kind of want to make sure this is pretty tight, and I want to kind of have my tree centered in this area. If you're using something else, you just kind of want your center of visual interest to be in there. And hit OK. And now we're going to start adding all of our images together. So we're going to start with our crystal ball, and it's going to move on to this black ball image. So I'm going to select all, copy, and paste. If you're not familiar with keyboard shortcuts, you can find those under the Edit menu. And so now you can really see those highlights in there of that crystal. Now, all of these photos are from Adobe stock images, and I think they have a crystal ball that's like on a pedestal that you are welcome to experiment with this. So now I'm going to move our scene that we created on top. So I'm going to select, copy, and paste. So now that tree is coming in quite big, but no worries. I'm going to transform it. So I just did Command T, which is also Edit, Transform, Scale. And if you're in the newest version of Photoshop, you don't have to hold Shift down to scale it in perspective, which is pretty convenient. So it looks like we're fitting there pretty well. I'm going to hit check. Now getting this in here, I'm noticing we have a couple of edges that I'm not wild about. I can go ahead and fix these before I go any further. So I'm going to just grab my healing brush tool and come in, and I'm just going to kind of smooth some of those edges out. And I can change the type of brush I'm using right up here, both the size and the softness of it. And I'm just kind of filling in those areas where we hadn't made the most perfect selection. So if your photo doesn't quite fit, or if you need to do any of those, you can add that to anything in there. So now we actually need to get our tree inside this globe. To do that, we're going to load this globe as a selection by hitting Command and clicking on it. And so you can see there it's loaded, but I still have layer 3 selected. With layer 3 selected, I'm going to click my layer mask, and now that just masked out all that extraneous content. So it's starting to look like a snow globe. So now we're going to grab our snow, and same thing as before, we'll select it, copy it, and paste it. And now we're going to kind of move our layers around and get those named before we do anything else. So this is our snow layer that we just moved in. We're going to call this our photo inside. This is our crystal. And this is our globe. And so I'm going to move this crystal up to the top of the stacking order, and I'm just dragging and dropping to make that happen. Now with this snow layer, I want to mask it as before. So the snow is just inside the snow globe. So same as before, I'm going to Command click the globe so I have that selection, select the snow layer, and then click mask. Now you're like, well, Heather, this is great. Now we can't see our lovely photo. No worries. So I'm going to drop down in my layer mode and hit screen. And so screen is one of our blending modes or layer modes. And this allows us to blend our photo together in different ways. We'll do that again here in a minute. So I'm going to take the globe and I'm going to put it above the photo. And I'm going to add a layer mask to it. So I'm just going to click that layer mask. And I'm going to grab my gradient. So with the mask, I'm revealing and hiding certain parts of the photo. So that's what I want to do with this image. And so I'm using a black to white basic linear gradient. And I'm just going to draw down. And you can see that's bringing kind of that photo back in. And you can see that gradient drawn right in there. Now we'll add an overlay to it and look how that is. So now we're ready to move this onto our background image. So let's open up our background image, just file open, and I'm going to take this whole image, so I'm going to grab all of these layers, selecting each of them, copy and paste. Now I can go ahead and transform this. So again, Command T and hit return. Now that gradient is what is allowing us to see back into that photo, but it looks like it has the same manipulation as this photo in here. So kind of interesting. Now we're going to add that reflection that's going to kind of create a little bit of presence here, so our globe doesn't look like it's just floating into space. So I'm going to control click and add that mask to our selection. Create a new layer. With that new layer, I actually want to fill this shape with black. So I'm going to go Edit, Fill. I'm filling with black and hit OK. I can also grab my paint bucket, and if black is my foreground color, just fill that. And now I'll transform that. So I'm going to take that and transform that. And so if I want to not hold the perspective, I just hold down my Shift key. And so I'm liking that positioning, but it's a little bit dark. So now we're going to add a blur to it. And you can see how that's just adding a bit of presence there. And hit OK. So that's our final snow globe look. Yeah, I think it would be fun to maybe bring in your Photoshop camera photo if you wanted to and kind of experiment with that. And hopefully this is encouraging you to explore masking and layers and layer modes a little bit more as well. So enjoy. I can't wait to see your work.